I never imagined that falling in love at 63 would lead me to solve the mystery that had haunted our small coastal town for 25 years. But that's exactly what happened when I met Daniel, the new history professor who moved in next door, 15 years my junior, and with eyes that seemed to see right through the careful walls I'd built around my heart. They say time heals all wounds. They're wrong. Some wounds just scab over, waiting for the slightest touch to break them open again and bleed fresh as the day they were made. And some secrets refuse to stay buried, no matter how deep you think you've hidden them. I'd lived in Seacliff Harbor my entire life. After losing Richard, my husband of 32 years, to cancer 3 years ago, I'd settled into what I thought would be the predictable rhythm of my remaining years. Mornings spent in my garden overlooking the bay, afternoons volunteering at the local library, evenings with my book club friends who had become my lifeline. My daughter Melissa called it existing, not living. She lived across the country with her family, and during her rare visits home, she'd pull brochures for senior cruises and art classes from her bag with the determination of someone on a mission. I'd smile and set them aside, knowing they'd join the growing collection in my desk drawer. "Mom," she'd say, gripping my hands, "Dad would want you to be happy, to really live again." I'd nod, but privately I wondered if that were true. Richard and I had been each other's first and only loves since high school. What would he think if he knew another man had taken his place in our bed? In the space beside me on the porch swing where we'd watched countless sunsets, the thought alone felt like betrayal. Then Daniel Rivers moved into the neglected craftsman next door. I first noticed him struggling with boxes on a misty April morning, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he balanced precariously on his porch steps. When I brought over my traditional welcome basket, sourdough bread, and homemade strawberry jam, I expected the polite, distant interaction typical in our neighborhood where most people kept to themselves. Instead, I found myself sitting on his dusty porch 2 hours later, laughing more than I had in years as he told stories of his misadventures in academia. Daniel had moved to Seacliff Harbor to finish writing his book on unsolved historical mysteries in small coastal towns, a subject that immediately caught my attention. "History is just collective memory with better documentation," he said, green eyes crinkling at the corners. "And memory is notoriously unreliable." I didn't tell him then how those words resonated with me. How often I'd questioned my own memories of that summer 25 years ago, when my best friend Elaine had disappeared without a trace. Our friendship developed naturally after that first meeting. Daniel needed a research assistant familiar with local history, and I needed, though I wouldn't have admitted it then, something to look forward to each day. We spent hours in the town archives, at the Historical Society, and interviewing longtime residents. His enthusiasm was contagious, his perspective refreshing. "You see things differently at your age," he told me one evening as we walked along the harbor path. "You mean as an old woman?" I teased, though part of me winced at the truth in it. "I mean as someone who's lived through history, not just studied it," he replied, his hand brushing mine, sending unexpected warmth up my arm. "You've seen how people can change or stay exactly the same over decades. That's insight I'll never have, no matter how many books I read." I tried to ignore the subtle shift happening between us, the way his eyes lingered on mine. How I found myself taking more care with my appearance, rediscovering the woman who once loved silk blouses and delicate perfume. The awareness of my body that I thought had died with Richard. My book club friends noticed immediately. "Margaret Sullivan, you're glowing," Carol said during our Thursday meeting. "And I haven't seen that blue dress in years." "It's just a dress," I protested, feeling my cheeks flush like a schoolgirl's. "And he's just a neighbor?" Diane asked, eyebrows raised. "The quite attractive professor who happens to be single? He's also 15 years younger than me," I reminded them and myself. "And I'm not looking for that." But on a rainy night in late May, when Daniel showed up at my door soaked to the skin after his car broke down a mile from home, something shifted. As he stood in my kitchen wrapped in Richard's old bathrobe, the only thing I had that would fit him, The barriers I'd built around my heart began to crumble. "I should go," he said, though neither of us moved. "You should stay," I whispered, surprised at my own boldness. That night changed everything. Not just because I let myself love again, something I never thought possible, but because afterward, lying in the darkness with his arm around me, I found myself talking about Elaine. About the summer of 1999, when my vibrant, fearless friend vanished without a trace, leaving behind a 3-year-old daughter and a community full of questions. The police investigated for months, I told him, the familiar pain rising in my chest. They questioned her ex-husband, followed every lead. But eventually, the case went cold. Most people assumed she'd just left, abandoned her life for reasons we'd never understand. "But you didn't believe that," Daniel said softly, not a question, but a statement. "No," I admitted. "Elaine would never have left Katie. Never." But after a while, it was easier to accept the official story than to live with not knowing. I didn't tell him the rest that night. About the argument Elaine and I had the day before she disappeared. About the secret she'd confided in me, one I'd kept for 25 years. About the guilt that had been my constant companion since that summer. Some truths were still too painful to share, even in the tender aftermath of newfound intimacy. Our relationship deepened over the following weeks. Daniel's presence in my life brought color back to a world that had faded to gray after Richard's death. We took weekend trips to nearby coastal towns, cooked elaborate meals together, and spent long evenings on my porch discussing everything from politics to poetry. But Daniel's research eventually led him to Elaine's case. It was inevitable, really. Her disappearance was the most significant unsolved mystery in Seacliff Harbor's recent history. The original police files are stored at the county records office, he mentioned casually one evening as we cleared dinner dishes. I've requested access for my book research. My hands froze on the plate I was rinsing. I'm not sure that's a good idea. He looked at me curiously. Why not? It's been 25 years, Margaret. Sometimes fresh eyes see things others missed. Some cases go cold for a reason, I said, more sharply than I intended. Some wounds are better left alone. That night, I lay awake long after Daniel had fallen asleep beside me, staring at the ceiling and remembering. Elaine had been so beautiful, so full of life, the kind of woman who turned heads when she entered a room. After her divorce, she'd moved back to Seacliff Harbor with little Katie, determined to rebuild her life on her own terms. "I'm finally going to tell the truth, Maggie," she'd said the last time I saw her alive, her blue eyes fierce with determination. No matter what it costs. The next day, she was gone. Her car found abandoned at the beach overlook, no signs of struggle, no clues to where she might have gone. Just gone. I'd kept her secret all these years. But now, with Daniel digging into the past, I feared what might surface. Not just for my sake, but for Katie's, now a grown woman with children of her own, who had built a life without the mother she barely remembered. A week later, Daniel came home from the records office with a troubled expression. "There are inconsistencies in the investigation," he said, spreading photocopied reports across my kitchen table. "Witness statements that contradict each other. Evidence that was logged and then seems to have disappeared." My heart pounded as I forced myself to look at the papers, at Elaine's smiling face in her last known photograph. "And I found this," he continued, sliding a faded envelope toward me. It was stuck between 2 report pages. "A letter addressed to you, Margaret. Never delivered." My hands trembled as I reached for it. The paper was yellowed with age, but I recognized Elaine's handwriting immediately, the looping curves of the letters, the way she always dotted her eyes with tiny circles. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I'm leaving this with Officer Jenkins. He's the only one I trust on the force. I need you to know the truth, even if I can't tell you myself. What I discovered about the mayor goes deeper than I imagined. The missing development funds, the environmental reports that were buried, it's all connected to what happened at Blackwater Cove. People have died to keep this quiet, Maggie. And now they're watching me too. I've gathered evidence, copies of documents that prove everything. They're hidden where we used to watch the sunset as teenagers, our special place. Under the third rock from the split pine. Take care of Katie if anything happens. And know that I never blamed you for not believing me. Some truths are too terrible to accept until we're forced to face them. With love always, Elaine. I sank into a chair, the letter clutched to my chest, as 25 years of certainty crumbled around me. Elaine hadn't left voluntarily. She'd been silenced. And the last conversation we'd had, the one where I'd told her she was being paranoid, that she needed to stop spreading rumors about the town's most respected figure, might have been what sealed her fate. Margaret. Daniel's voice seemed to come from far away. Do you know what she's referring to? What evidence? I nodded slowly, the weight of decades of guilt pressing down on me. I know exactly where it is, I whispered. And I've known all along. That night brought the first real argument between Daniel and me. He wanted to go to the police immediately with the letter and whatever evidence we might find. I wasn't sure I could face the consequences of the truth after burying it for so long. You don't understand what this town was like back then, I tried to explain, pacing my living room. Mayor Phillips was untouchable. His family had founded Seacliff Harbor. The police chief was his brother-in-law. The local judge played golf with him every Sunday. And now, Daniel challenged. Phillips died years ago. The police chief retired. Things change, Margaret. Do they? I asked bitterly. His son is mayor now. His grandson is the district attorney. The Phillips family still owns half the businesses in town. But the truth was, my hesitation stemmed from something deeper than fear of the Phillips family. It came from shame, from the knowledge that I had failed Elaine when she needed me most, that I had chosen comfort over courage, safety over truth. I didn't believe her, I admitted finally, tears streaming down my face. She came to me first with what she'd found. About the toxic waste being dumped at Blackwater Cove, about the bribes, about the worker who died mysteriously after threatening to go public. And my voice broke, I told her she was being dramatic. That she needed to think about Katie, about the consequences of accusing someone so powerful. Daniel's expression softened. He crossed the room and took my hands in his. You were afraid for her, he said gently. That's not a crime. No, I agreed, but what I did next was unforgivable. When the police came asking questions after she disappeared, I never mentioned any of it. I let them believe she'd simply abandoned her life, her child. I let Katie grow up thinking her mother hadn't loved her enough to stay. The weight of that betrayal had shaped the last 25 years of my life. It was why I'd never left Seacliff Harbor, why I'd devoted so much time to the library where Katie often came as a child, why I'd anonymously paid for her college education. Atonement for a sin I couldn't bring myself to confess. It's not too late to make it right, Daniel said, his eyes holding mine steadily. For Elaine, for Katie, for you. The next morning, we drove to the cliffs overlooking the sea, to the secluded spot where Elaine and I had spent countless teenage hours dreaming of the lives we would lead. The split pine was still there, though weathered by decades of salt wind. My hands shook as I counted to the third rock and began to dig. The metal box was rusted but intact, sealed with a combination lock, Katie's birthday, I realized with a pang as I turned the dials. Inside lay a stack of documents, photographs, and a small cassette tape preserved in plastic. She really did have evidence, I whispered, leafing through papers that detailed illegal dumping, falsified environmental reports, and financial records showing payoffs to local officials. All this time, Daniel studied the photographs, dark, grainy images of men unloading barrels at night along the secluded cove. We need to take this to someone we can trust, he said. Not the local police. I nodded, gathering the precious materials. But as we turned to leave, a voice called out from behind us. I've been waiting a long time for someone to find that. I whirled around to see a man in his 50s watching us from the tree line. It took me a moment to recognize him, Officer Jenkins, now retired, the one person Elaine had trusted on the police force. "I knew someone would come eventually," he said, approaching slowly. "I just didn't think it would be you, Margaret." His words cut deep, but I couldn't deny their truth. "I was a coward," I admitted, "but I'm trying to make it right now." Jenkins looked at the box in my hands, then at Daniel. "After all these years, are you sure you want to open this door? The Phillips family still has power in this town." I thought of Elaine, vibrant, brave Elaine who had risked everything for the truth. I thought of Katie, who deserved to know what had really happened to her mother. And I thought of myself, carrying the burden of silence for 25 long years. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said with a conviction that surprised even me. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Daniel used his academic connections to bring in a journalist friend from a national newspaper. Jenkins provided testimony about the original investigation being derailed. The evidence Elaine had gathered, especially the tape recording of Mayor Phillips threatening her, proved to be the key that unlocked everything. As the story broke, Seacliff Harbor erupted into chaos. Old alliances shattered. People I'd known my entire life stopped speaking to me or praised my courage, with little middle ground. The current Mayor Phillips, Edmund Jr., held a press conference denying any knowledge of his father's actions, but his nervous demeanor told a different story. The hardest moment came when I had to face Katie. At 38, she was now older than Elaine had been when she disappeared. The resemblance between them was so striking it took my breath away when she arrived at my door one rainy afternoon. "Why now?" she asked, her voice controlled, but her eyes swimming with decades of pain. "Why not when I was a child, wondering every night if my mother had abandoned me because I wasn't enough?" There was nothing I could say to ease that pain, no explanation that would justify my silence. All I could offer was the truth. "I was afraid," I said simply. "And by the time I realized that my fear had cost you your mother's memory, it seemed too late to undo the damage." Katie didn't forgive me that day. How could she? But as the investigation progressed, as Diverse searched Blackwater Cove and finally found Elaine's remains weighted down in the deepest part, we formed a fragile connection built on our shared love for the woman we had both lost. I gave her the photographs I'd kept all these years, Elaine holding baby Katie, Elaine laughing at her 3rd birthday party, Elaine painting seashells on Katie's nursery wall. "She adored you," I told her. Everything she did, including investigating the corruption, was to make the world better for you. The arrest of former officials, including Jenkins' old boss, the police chief who had deliberately mishandled the investigation, brought some measure of justice. But nothing could bring back the 25 years we'd lost. The night before the Phillips trial was set to begin, Daniel found me sitting on the porch swing, staring out at the moonlit bay. "Second thoughts?" he asked, settling beside me. "No," I said, taking his hand. "Just reflecting on how many lives were changed because one woman refused to look the other way, and how many more were changed because I did exactly that." "You can't change the past," he reminded me gently. No, I agreed. But Elaine showed me that it's never too late to fight for the truth, even when it costs you everything. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse with Katie on one side and Daniel on the other. As reporters called out questions and cameras flashed, I held my head high for the first time in 25 years. The burden of silence had finally been lifted from my shoulders. In that moment, facing the Phillips family across the courtroom, I felt Elaine's presence more strongly than I had since the day she disappeared. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that she would have been proud. 1 year later, I stood at the edge of Blackwater Cove, now renamed Elaine's Point, after the environmental cleanup was complete. The memorial garden planted there bloomed with her favorite wildflowers, and the plaque told the true story of her courage. Katie had moved back to Seacliff Harbor with her children, taking a position at the local high school teaching environmental science. We had weekly dinners together, sometimes awkward, sometimes tearful, but healing a little more each time. The town itself was slowly recovering from the scandal. Some wounds would never fully heal, But there was a new transparency in local government, a watchfulness that hadn't existed before. As for Daniel and me, we married in a simple ceremony on the beach 6 months after the trial ended. Some eyebrows were raised at our age difference, but we had learned the hard way that life is too precious to waste on other people's expectations. Any regrets? Daniel asked as we walked hand in hand along the shore, watching the sunset paint the water gold and crimson. I thought about Richard, about the decades of love we had shared, about Elaine and the friendship that had shaped my youth, about the years of silence and fear that had followed her disappearance, about finding love again at 63, when I thought that part of my life was over. Only that it took me so long to find my courage, I replied honestly. Elaine knew the truth was worth fighting for, even when it cost her everything. I had to lose her to finally learn that lesson. We stopped at the viewpoint where they had found her abandoned car all those years ago. I closed my eyes, feeling the wind on my face, imagining it carried her voice from wherever spirits go when they leave us. Some wounds just scab over, waiting for the slightest touch to break them open again. That's what I had thought at the beginning of this journey. But now I understood something different, something truer. Some wounds need to be reopened to heal properly. Some truths refuse to stay buried because they're seeds, waiting for the right season to grow into something beautiful and necessary. My new beginning with Daniel had led me back to an old ending, and in doing so, had given Elaine the justice she deserved and Katie the truth she needed. Had given me, finally, the peace I'd sought for 25 years. I turned from the railing to face the future, my hand still firmly in my husband's, my heart open to whatever came next. At 64, I had learned that it's never too late for truth, for courage, for love. It's never too late for a new beginning.